She was 24 years old. She had been dying for months, tuberculosis slowly consuming her lungs. And in those final weeks, something strange began happening in her soul. The spiritual consolations she had known her whole life, the sense of God's presence, the peace of prayer, they vanished completely. Instead, she wrote, "I am assailed by the worst temptations of atheism." The dying woman was Therese of Lisieux, and in her final hours, she said something that the Church has quietly pondered for over 100 years. She said, "I have never given God anything but love, and it is with love that He will receive me." And then she died. So here's the question that this entire video is going to answer. Why did the greatest saints in history, the people who gave God everything, why did they all say that the final surrender, the last letting go, was the hardest thing they ever did? And what does that mean for the rest of us? There is a question that almost every Catholic thinks, but few people actually ask out loud. It goes something like this. I believe. I go to Mass. I try to live a good life. And honestly, I love my family. I love my kids. I love my husband or my wife more than I can put into words. So, is that a problem? And the answer that the Church gives, the answer that every spiritual master in Catholic history gives, is uncomfortable. Yes, it can be. Not because love is wrong, but because of something very specific about the kind of love we have, and what we're willing to do when God asks us to loosen our grip. The Catechism of the Catholic Church, in paragraph 1030, describes purgatory as a final purification for those who die in God's grace, but are, and I want you to notice this word, imperfectly purified. Imperfectly purified, which means attached. Today we're going to look at what that attachment actually is, what the saints experienced when God stripped it away, and, most importantly, what this means for your life right now. Because the saints didn't just theorize about this, they lived it. And some of them left behind descriptions of what it felt like that will change the way you think about everything you love. To understand what the Church is actually teaching, we have to go back to the 16th century, to a Carmelite friar named Juan de Yepes, who history would call John of the Cross. John of the Cross didn't just write about the spiritual life. He was imprisoned by his own religious brothers, literally thrown into a tiny cell in Toledo, given nothing but bread and water. And it was there, in that darkness, that he began to understand something. He called it the dark night of the soul. And almost every Catholic has heard that phrase, but almost no one knows what it actually describes. It is not depression. It is not doubt in the usual sense. It is God deliberately withdrawing every spiritual consolation from a soul He loves, so that the soul will stop loving the consolations and start loving God. Think about that for a moment. John wrote, "God leads into the dark night those whom He intends to purify and bring to union with Himself." The darkness is not punishment. The darkness is preparation. Here is what John describes happening in stages. First, God gives the soul what He calls sensory consolations, the feeling of warmth in prayer, the sense of nearness, emotional peace. For most Catholics, this is what faith feels like. This is the good period. This is what we're trying to get back to when prayer feels dry. But then, and this is the part no one tells you in RCIA, God takes it away. But what no one talks about is that this stripping, this darkness, is not a sign that something has gone wrong. According to John of the Cross, Augustine, Thomas Aquinas, and the Catechism itself, it is a sign that something has gone exactly right. Because here is the problem that God is solving. We have learned to love the feeling of God more than we love God Himself. We have learned to love His gifts more than the giver. And as long as that is true, as long as our love for God is really just our love for what God makes us feel, we are not ready for heaven. Because in heaven, the object of love is God Himself, in all His infinite being, not as a dispenser of comforts, but as pure love, eternally giving and receiving. And we cannot enter that love if we are still clutching the consolations, if we are still, as the Church puts it, imperfectly purified. Now let me bring this down to earth, because this is not just a problem for mystics in Carmelite prisons. Think about the thing in your life you would find hardest to give up. Not the things you want to give up, or the things you know are bad for you. I mean the things that are genuinely good. Your marriage, your children, your work, the community you've built. Now ask yourself, if God asked you to trust Him with that, completely, could you? Not give it up necessarily, trust Him with it. If the answer is a terrified no, you are not alone. You are in the company of nearly every Christian who has ever lived. And that is exactly the problem the spiritual life exists to solve. The Church has given us Lumen Gentium 49, the document from the Second Vatican Council on the Church, and it says something precise about this. It describes the souls in purgatory as those who, having died, are being purified so that they may enter the holy city. Note what it doesn't say. It doesn't say they are being punished for sins. It says they are being purified, cleansed of whatever in them is still not yet capable of receiving perfect love. And the Catechism, paragraph 1031, connects this directly to the fire imagery of Scripture, the fire that tests and transforms, the same fire that 1 Corinthians 3 describes. Each one's work will become manifest, for the day will disclose it, because it will be revealed by fire. What is being burned away? Not just bad habits, not just mortal sin, which is already forgiven. What's being burned away is disordered attachment, the love of good things in the wrong order, with more grip than God. Let me give you a historical example that makes this concrete. Thomas More, Chancellor of England, husband, father of four, man of letters, defender of the Church. He was imprisoned in the Tower of London for refusing to sign the Act of Supremacy, refusing to declare Henry VIII head of the Church. His daughter Meg came to visit him and begged him to recant. Just sign the paper. Just say the words. Think of us. Think of me. And More, who loved Meg above almost everything in this world, wrote to her from prison, "I will not mistrust him, Meg, though I shall feel myself weakening and on the verge of being overcome with fear. I shall remember that St. Peter, at a blast of wind, began to sink because of his little faith, and I shall do as he did, call upon Christ and pray to him for help." And then, in June of 1535, something happened on Tower Hill that the Church has never stopped talking about. Before they took his head, Thomas More turned to the crowd and said, "I die the King's good servant, but God's first." Do you understand what that represents? More loved his daughter, he loved his family, and he let them go, not because they didn't matter, but because they were not the summum bonum. They were not the highest good. They were signs pointing to something greater, and he refused to mistake the signs for the destination. The Catechism calls this the order of charity, not the absence of love for creatures, but love for creatures in proper relation to love for God. And it is precisely this ordered love that the spiritual life trains us toward, and that death, or purgatory, completes. Let me come back to Therese, because I want you to understand what she actually went through in those last 18 months of her life. Therese had entered the Carmel at age 15. She had given up everything, normal life, marriage, the world, for God. She had built her entire spirituality around trust, the little way, total confidence in God's love. And then God took even that away. She wrote, "The darkness is so dense. When I sing of heaven's happiness, it gives me no joy. I simply sing of what I want to believe. Read that again. She sang of what she wanted to believe, not what she felt, not what consoled her. She sang from pure will into the darkness. This is what the Church calls the passive night of the Spirit. God strips away not just sensory comfort, but spiritual comfort, so that the soul's last attachment, the attachment to its own experience of God, is also released. What remains, what Therese died holding, was not a feeling. It was God Himself. And here is the revelation. Every attachment you carry into death, you carry into purgatory. Not because God is punishing you, but because you are not yet capable of receiving Him fully while you are still holding on to something else. Your marriage, your children, your career, your reputation, even your spiritual life, the consolations you've come to rely on, the faith that makes you feel good about yourself. God loves you too much to let you spend eternity half present in His presence. So He trains you, He strips you. He gives you this life as the curriculum and death as the final exam. What strikes me most about all of this is that it is not a teaching about giving up the people you love. It is a teaching about loving them properly, holding them with open hands instead of a closed fist. There is a difference between a parent who loves their child and a parent who needs their child, who has quietly made that child responsible for the parent's own sense of meaning and worth. The child feels it, and it is not love. It is gravity disguised as love. The spiritual masters call this disordered attachment, and they say, gently but firmly, that we all have it, about something. John of the Cross wrote, "It matters little whether a bird is tied by a thin thread or a thick chain. Either way, it cannot fly." The question is not whether you love too much. The question is whether what you love is in the right order, whether the people and things you love point you toward God, or whether they have quietly become a substitute for Him. Therese sang in the dark. Thomas More died on a scaffold. John of the Cross wrote his greatest poetry in a prison cell. They were not extraordinary because they loved less. They were extraordinary because they discovered the one love that survives death. What is the one thing in your life that you suspect you are holding too tightly? Leave it in the comments. Not to be judged, but because naming it might be the first act of surrender. The Church doesn't teach total surrender because love doesn't matter. She teaches it because love is everything. And because the love that survives death, the love that actually reaches heaven, is the love that has been freed from fear. Therese died saying, "My God, I love you." Not, "I feel your presence." Not, "I am comforted." Just, "I love you." That's the finish line. If this video made you think, if it made you a little uncomfortable in the best possible way, subscribe. This channel exists for Catholics who want to go deeper, not safer, and God's first.